Hello and welcome to the War Report. Now, this is take two because last night my computer, well, more of my error, we lost everything after being an hour in recording, but we're going to forget about that. We're going to have a good show tonight. And for those of you listening, of course, it'll probably be like 5 o'clock Eastern on Friday evening. So I hope you're enjoying your Friday, but let's get right into it. So, of course, over the weekend, there was another flare up between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Gaza. Hamas allegedly fired over 600 rockets at Israel after some Israeli operation. These kind of things happen all the time again. I don't even know who started it this time, and frankly, I don't care. The IDF did say via Twitter that they had assassinated Ahmed Kudari, who, quote, "We just targeted Hamed Ahmed Kudari, a Gazan terrorist responsible for transferring Iranian rockets and funds to Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, helping fund their rocket fire at Israelis. Transferring Iranian money to Hamas and the PIJ does not make you a businessman, it makes you a terrorist." For now, the two sides have come to a ceasefire, but it's more the same, more usual, petty squabbles between them, as I'll put it.
Yeah, it's ongoing. Fortunately, the amount of people killed this time is significantly less than it was in 2014, which I think saw over 2,000 dead Palestinians and about 160, 167 dead Israelis. This time we're looking at 67 versus 4. But a lot of these protests, we all know Israel actually targets children. They in a sense, the Israeli government needs the protests. They need the antagonism, and this latest series of violence, of escalation, is the result of the right of return protests that have been going on at the border.
Yes, but in terms of Israeli policy, I'll put it in terms I think our audience will understand. Now, for those of you who remember the long ago, the year 2016, late 2016, when Syrian forces with Russian support were taking back Aleppo, pretty much everything they fearmongered that the Russians and the Syrians were doing in Aleppo, Israel actually does to Gaza.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
I mean, that's probably where they got the script. They probably got, like, okay, now every time it says Israel, replace it with Russian Syria. Every time it says civilians, moderate rebels, replace it with Palestinians. Like, it's probably, they probably just did that, like, just flipped the script on that and got like, oh, thank you, Israel, for being a propaganda factory. Just had to, strike out a few words, fill in a few lines, and it worked out swimmingly. Now, I do have to say, I've made this very clear before, frankly, I do not care about the border dispute between these two countries, and I think, not necessarily the Palestinian government as a whole, but Hamas is no more moral than the Israelis and vice versa. They both fire indiscriminately at each other. The difference is Palestine has bottle rockets, the Hamas has bottle rockets, while Israel has high-tech weapons from pretty much every Western nation in the world. If I'm supposed to support Israel because they're bombing terrorists in Gaza, allegedly, does that mean I should also support Russia and Syria for fighting militants in Latakia and Hama?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said.
But with the mention of Syria, we'll get right into Syria because, oh boy, it's been a big week there. And fortunately enough, the U.S. has been rather quiet about it, so there's that. But the SAA on Monday started its offensives in northwestern Hama. At least 2 villages were reportedly liberated. Militant groups led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, were creating a strike force in southern Idlib, according to the Russian military. Now, there's been over 200 Russian airstrikes and Syrian airstrikes reported in the province of Idlib and Hama, but that's of course according to militant and rebel sources. The SAA has been using heavy Golan improvised rocket-assisted munitions to strike terrorist positions and fortifications in northern Latakia. And in news in northern Syria, Kurdish rebels attempted to eliminate a vehicle of pro-Turkish forces in Maranaz on May 5th. An IED explosion reportedly wounded 3 people in Manjib, where U.S. forces are unfortunately still stationed, and I will pull up the map for our fine audience here if you have any input on that.
Right. This has been long in coming, because Al-Sham has been the main group which has been squabbling not only with other jihadist factions within Idlib, but also as the primary instigator of attacks on in Latakia and in other places. And I mean, Russia has to do something. You know, support for the war in Syria is waning. Some statistics, like from the Moscow Times, which is essentially it's Western owned, so they're skewed against Russia. But I tend to believe it that about 55% of the Russian public is no longer in favor of the war in Russia, in the war in Syria, and and that that has there's several economic factors behind that. Not to mention also Ukraine.
And
You
everything
know,
that's happening in the Baltics and the Arctic with the U.S. and UK and NATO
yeah,
generals drills there.
Venezuela as well. And I think there was the expectation that Russia would not get bogged down. They're at now. There'll be 4 years in September, and I don't think they want like a very long war. They don't want a repetition. Not only of the Afghani war, but even the Chechen war. So yeah, so that's waning. It looks sort of, you know, it's the last section of Syria that I think a complete victory is possible. Uh, that's not possible in the Kurdish-held north,
Yeah, the
and in
Kurdish held
fact,
north backed by the U.S. isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen in the Golan Heights. And it's not going to happen in Turkish occupied Afrin. I'm sorry, but no. Assad, despite his bluster, is not going to liberate every inch, unfortunately.
right, and the Americans need that section controlled by the Kurds. In fact, uh, to keep Turkey in check. Essentially, it's not even really for as a bulwark against Assad. The Kurds are not Assad's biggest problem, although they have moved forward. Now they have schools in Turkish. Their grammar books are in Turkish and so on. So they too are kind of creating their own kind of semi-autonomous state, the kind that developed in Iraq.
Yes, that's no surprise either. And despite the fact that negotiations have faltered over the past few months, the Assad government and the Kurdish forces are still in communication with each other. They're also in communication with Moscow. And again, it probably is just the U.S. wedge against Turkey. And as U.S. Turkish relations get better or worse, the U.S. support for the Kurds will probably follow accordingly.
Yeah, I would think so, and they're actually more beneficial for Assad than if they were under his control. To be quite honest,
Yes.
they have a bigger beef with Turkey than even he does, and it, they could be used as a tool.
Now, more on the new offensive. Over the past week, militants from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in the controlled regions of Hama that they're still in have been launching missiles at Syrian and Russian targets. Of course, not much outrage is when it happens to Israel, but unlike Israel, Russian and Syrian forces are competent enough to repel these attacks. Now, this offensive was inevitable, as we predicted last week. Russian claimed that militants were forming strike groups to attack Hama and moved to react on May 6th. The situation is also escalating in northern Aleppo. The Turkish-backed National Syrian Army, NSA for short, of course, another NSA, add that on top of National Security Agency, National Security Advisor. I mean, how many more NSAs can we, go on with? But that's aside the point. They've been clashing with Kurdish YPG forces. And on top of the Operation Hama, on May 7th, the SAA launched a full offensive on the Idlib province. Russia is also swarming the skies above Idlib and hammering militant targets. So far, the SAA has captured Tal Othman and Albani. Militants have launched counterattacks but failed to take back any territory. On May 8th, yesterday, SAA forces repelled several HTS counterattacks but have made no further gains. It appears that the operation, as of May 8th, was a limited one to prevent HTS from pushing any further than the Hama. Now, today, May 9th, has brought major developments. The SAA entered the strategic town of Kalat al Makdid after reaching agreement with the locals, who forced radical militants to withdraw. This has not stopped attack from Kurdish-linked militants attacking SAA tanks. Now, similar negotiations, such as the one in Khalat al-Makid, are going on with Khan Shaykhun, which was the alleged site of the 2017 chemical attack. Now, Khan Shaykhun is crucial because it links Hama to Aleppo. And on top of this, the SAA has had successes in southeastern Idlib by repelling more militant attacks.
Yeah, they haven't totally capitalized on. Well, they have. I don't want to say they haven't capitalized on their gains. They have, but they haven't been able to move forward. There have been two smaller villages that are also part of this area that they've captured. Um, I think they're going to press on. Also, while Venezuela is still a thing, and Iran, uh, and of course, there's trade talks, North Korea. There's a lot going on, and there's, I think, very little that either the UN or the US or NATO can do really anything about this.
Yes, the Americans are
Uh,
very distracted and the Europeans are unwilling. Except maybe, I don't know, Macron or May. But aside from that, there's not going to be much outrage because the world is just too distracted.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the West altogether. I think there is um, so much internal strife and discord that um, it people are just not going to get impassioned about it.
Oh,
I
no,
mean, it
I
was
mean,
barely they were barely able to sum up that in 2015 when Russia entered uh, Syria, but in 2019, very doubtful.
remember the reaction to last year's chemical attacks, how much skepticism was met with, and how much outrage and strikes were met with? I mean, you really
Yeah.
think you're going to be able to drum up any outrage if they were to try to pull anything like that right now? I mean, that's why I think they didn't pull it back in April, because there were tepid moves towards Idlib. Of course, not a full offensive, but they still could have very well just pulled a chemical attack. And lo and behold, they didn't. I think they realized that it has diminishing returns, and they've diminished those returns to zero.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Now, with that out of the way, I do want to move on to a little bit of Libyan news. Not too much significant there, but it's always nice to get a nice little update there. So let me pull up my notes again. As of May 4th, the Libyan National Army, LNA, recaptured the villages of Sabik and Sol al Sabat in the international airport area of South Tripoli. Now, you'll recall they've been fighting heavily over the airport for obvious reasons. Now, at the same time, forces loyal to the Government of National Accord, GNA, have made several minor advances into the north of the airport. Clashes are still ongoing in the Turwashaya area. LNA leader Haftar has called for heavier fighting during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, saying, quote, "Officers and soldiers in our armed forces and in the auxiliary forces, I salute you in this glorious month and urge you, with your strength and determination, to teach the enemy a greater and bigger lesson than previous ones, as we already have you known to do, till we uproot them from our beloved lands." Now, contrast this with the statement from the United Nations. So, last week, the UN called for a week-long humanitarian truce starting on the 5th. And they say, quote, "The United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL, congratulates all Libyans on the advent of the holy month of Ramadan. The UN calls for an extendable 1 week humanitarian truce starting at 4 in the morning on the 1st of Ramadan, the 6th of May, in accordance with the spirit of the month as well as the Human Rights Convention, which, during which all parties pledge to halt all forms of military operation, including reconnaissance, shelling, sniper operations, mobilization of forces. The UN calls on all parties to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid to those in need and to ensure the freedom of movement for all civilians during this truce. The mission encourages all parties to use the truce as an opportunity to exchange prisoners and the bodies of the deceased and express its readiness to provide necessary support in this regard." It's very interesting to see the contrast between a Muslim such as Haftar and his statements he's making to his Muslim army as compared to the atheistic Westerners in charge of the UN. I just thought that was a little bit of an interesting aside.
Yeah, I think this is also they're saying this basically also to for their Muslim audience within Europe. In a way, it's to signal to them how they would like Muslims to behave and think and so on.
Yeah, it actually harkens back to my video at the beginning of the week about westernized Muslims, which you should check out if you haven't watched already. Now, moving on beyond Libya, I wanted to cover a little bit on Yemen. So let's get right into that. Yemen map right there. Excellent. So, a brief update, not too much. Ansar Allah and IPI popular committees are developing their own operation to encircle the town of Kataaba, and heavy clashes are ongoing. According to pro-Ansar Allah media, Ansar Allah forces have cleared some of the areas in the Zahir district, Ida province. Clashes between Ansar Allah and pro-Saudi-led forces in the Alab crossing and Rabuta area continue. The Al-Hudaydah ceasefire is being violated on a daily basis. Saudi-led forces targeted several areas inside and outside of the Hudaydah city with mortar shells. Ansar Allah forces are advancing on Sada, and of course the U.S. Senate failed to overturn Trump's support for the war through the veto. Now, this is about the third time they've tried it, and every time, both Democrat and Republican, you see more discontent with the war, but of course Trump keeps on vetoing it and keeps on continuing the war. So, I'm thinking if the Senate just pushes it further, they're eventually going to get to that two-thirds, where it's going to force Trump's arm to end support for the Saudis' war.
Yeah, I think it's just a gradual pressure. It may it may not even be Trump, but whoever follows after. I mean, if the war is still going on, I mean, obviously Trump is being pushed to do this. I think probably because Yemen is it's very strategic in terms of trade routes.
Yeah,
And
the Gulf of Aden, that area between the Red Sea, very strategic to both our greatest allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So we can't let that fall.
right, but also for oil exports, and it's also a way of say blocking Iran oil exports into Europe. It's just very strategic, and it's a difficult, I suppose, from a very Machiavellian point of view, a very difficult decision to make. But it's really become an ugly war. Something like 80% of the population is facing starvation. This is a population of roughly around 24 million. So you have a catastrophe in the making. The UN has managed to use one of the ports in the rebel-held area to provide grain. However, the grain has to be fumigated. So it's very complex right now. And, in that part of the world, from the people I know that I will speak to once in a while and on Google Plus, because that's where they're posting a lot of this, this for them is a very tragic war, and it builds a tremendous amount of animosity towards America.
Now, what I find particularly interesting about this is, of course, the U.S. is not entirely energy independent because the OPEC cartel is still in existence. But as the OPEC cartel, especially with Qatar leaving, grows more and more irrelevant every day, every year, every month, it's interesting watching the U.S. double down on these wars in the Middle East, specifically in the Gulf, for that reason, because it seems like they're almost afraid to let go of what they've had for 70 years. And there's forces, mainly someone like John Bolton or a Mike Pompeo, who I imagine are pushing Trump pretty heavily to hold on to U.S. control over the Persian Gulf.
Right, that's part of it, and I think also what's part of it is, of course, the tie-in between the American dollar and the trade of oil. Like, I mean, America being energy independent is like, okay, well, that's great, but
yeah, the petrodollar's a big part of it. It's
huge.
incestuous relationship, to say the very least. But you were pointing this out on our first take of this before our program crashed last night, that if the media covered Yemen as much as they did Syria or even Libya back when we were fighting Gaddafi, that this war would have lost popular support back when it started.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 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 I forgot to mention that tonight, but yeah.
But it's fantastic considering the fact, not to brag, but almost a year ago we predicted that this course of events would happen. Now I didn't see the Khashoggi thing happening. That was that's actually like 7 months ago at this point. Wow, feels like just yesterday we were talking about him incessantly, doesn't it? But it,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I didn't anticipate it being over something like Khashoggi, liquidated CIA asset in the most literal sense. But what worked, and the Western media, whenever they cover it, it is critical of Saudi Arabia, of course, because they can use Saudi Arabia to bash Trump. Not to play like the oh what if game, but I can tell you, if some establishment Republican like Marco Rubio were president, if Hillary Clinton were president, and the exact same scenario was going on, they wouldn't criticize Saudi Arabia because it would be one of their own. Not that Trump isn't, but he's just enough removed from the establishment to the point where they will attack him like they do.
Right. Yeah. Right. Also, I think there was already too much information in Khashoggi. Uh, it's not just that he's a remote figure, he's somebody that people don't know that much about. It's that they do, and that there's a significant amount of people that know that he got his journalistic career kicked off when he made friends with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan and so on. And there isn't going to be that kind of empathy for him. You can talk about the rule of law all you want, but the truth is, the rule of law, it hasn't really been obeyed. Our countries have tried to work ways around it in a very sort of blatant way for the last 20 years, and it's I mean, he's nothing. You can literally find memes. Erdogan did nothing wrong. As if
Yeah,
he's the one.
and the G20 last year when Putin met Mohammed bin Salman, they did that weird high five handshake, and it's like
Yeah, yeah,
when you own the journos, stuff like that is what you're referring to.
yeah. That's exactly my point. Yeah.
Um, but while we're on the Middle East, let's move on to probably the biggest story of the week, which is the debacle in Iran, however you want to pronounce it, Persia. I don't care what you call it, but I think you get where I'm going with this. So, of
Yeah.
course, pressure has ramped up. Yesterday, as actually, that would be Tuesday at this point. These notes are a little bit out of date. Forgive me for that. The U.S. dispatched the U.S. Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group to the Middle East to send a quote unmistakable message to Iran. Bolton released a statement saying, quote, in response to a number of troubling and escalatory incidences and warnings, the United States is deploying the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group and a bomber task force to U.S. Central Command region in the Middle East to send a clear and unmistakable message to the Iranian regime that any attack on United States interests or those of our allies will be met with unrelenting force. The United States is not seeking war with the Iranian regime. Sure, I'll see when I believe it. But we are fully prepared to respond to any attack, whether it be by proxy, the IRGC, or regular Iranian forces. So, Bolton not seeking war, I have a hard time believing that one, but whatever. But point being is Bolton's blowing off a lot of hot air. Not much from Trump so far, but allegedly we are doing this because of information passed to us by the ever so reliable State of Israel and their intelligence agencies. Such as the great intelligence they gave us on Iraq and Syria. Definitely take them at their word. They would never double cross us or manipulate information for their own benefit. Absolutely not.
No, remember that? Remember the Iraq War? Remember the death that caused? Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, Israel too is now a country that is held in contempt and suspicion, and of course all the anti-boycott laws that are being passed in America regarding Israel. It's really if it weren't for its place in the top levels of Western power, it would suffer a lot more derision, and it wouldn't have the ability to what seems like the ability to dictate to the U.S. what it ought to do.
Now, not to get off on too much of a tangent with that, but as you were saying, Israel has become it has dropped in popularity, especially with the rise of the alternative media and less stranglehold by the establishment controlling media and cultural narratives. The thing with Israel is support overall across the political spectrum, Democrat, Republican, Independent, has dropped. It's actually dropped most amongst Republicans, especially young Republicans. Republicans under the age of 50, I believe, dropped 13% for support of Israel. Only 6% for Democrats, if I'm remembering these figures correctly. But point being is, Israel's power now lies in the ties they have within the Western, specifically American bureaucracy, such as groups like the State Department, CIA, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about America sort of playing all its cards. I think Israel is very close to that.
yeah, I mean, I got to give them credit because up until the advent of the internet, they were playing this dual game that was rather quite impressive. They had the conservatives and religious people convinced, oh look, you have to support us because of biblical prophecy. They have the left wingers, the liberals convinced you have to support it because we're the only democracy that has gay and women rights. You know, we're a shining beacon in the Middle East against the tyranny of Islam, which that argument works on conservatives nowadays, unfortunately. But it was interesting because I would say up until actually the Obama era, up until the advent of the internet, they were playing both sides. You know, if the Democrats are in power, they played to that. If the Republicans in power, they played to the other one. So it's going to be interesting when the only thing they have is support within the entrenched power structure. Because look at how much they're flaunting it now. They're flaunting their influence. They talk about see pretty much if you point out Israeli influence and you have a negative opinion about it, you're an anti-Semite. If you point it out and have a positive opinion about it, you're just praising Israel and you're respecting them as the greatest ally that they are. It's actually a weird double standard. It's okay when they say it, but not when we say it. But aside from that, as I was saying, you look at it, once their support is only in the bureaucracy, they're going to have a harder and harder time because, yeah, the power structure are important, but being democracies in Western nations, they're still going to have to convince the average person. And you see Israel trying to actually make this pivot again, pandering to the populists in Europe. For example, you'll remember Israel with Orban, the Polish prime minister, even sometimes Salvini. But the thing is, Israel can't help but browbeat and bash the few countries that actually support and stand by them. You'll recall back in, I believe it was in February, where Netanyahu was shaming the Polish people over their complacency in the Holocaust or something like that. Point being is, the Israelis, even the more pragmatic ones like Netanyahu, I'm not saying Netanyahu's a dumb man by any regards, maybe arrogant, but not dumb, they still feel the need to shame and browbeat these countries, especially where it doesn't work like Poland. And at the end of the day, they isolate these few countries, or at least the populace of these few countries, that would actually be inclined to support them.
Right, and there's even a split to just add to more what you were saying. There's even a few evangelical Americans now that are moving away from Israel. There's a YouTube channel I discovered called True News, which is extremely anti-Israel. And mocks the whole Schofield Bible-based idea of Christian eschatology. Or the one that we've become very familiar with guys like Hagee and so on. So there's a split happening there as well. And like you say, only in the most entrenched elite areas are they able to wield the power. And as you say, like once you lose popular support and all you have is raw zoological power, your days are numbered because all power is relational.
It's almost like how U.S. military power is now. We have the most powerful military in the world by objective standard. We have the best weapons. We have the best trained forces there are, but we don't have the political capital to use them properly.
Right.
Now,
right.
Speaking of Israel on the Iran issue, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, had to come out and clarify, and he said that the deployment of these aircraft carriers and bombers was not in response to the situation in Gaza, and pretty much was saying, "Oh, we're definitely not doing this for Israel or anything. Don't look over there. We're doing this because Iran is threatening our troops in the Middle East." So very conspicuous, if you ask me.
Yeah, he's preempting. That's all it is. He's anticipating what everybody's already thinking, and that's the sign. Basically, that's the giveaway that popular support has died.
Yes. Now, this recent move by the U.S. follows the past month of escalation with Iran. First, it was the oil sanctions. Then, it was designating the IRGC a terrorist group. Then, it was removing the sanctions waivers from countries such as the ones in Europe, China, India, Japan, so on and so forth. And then, it's to where we are now. Now, we have to consider, yesterday, May 8th, marked 1 year since Donald Trump officially withdrew the United States from the Iran deal. And from May to November of last year, it was an odd lull, except the one infamous all caps Trump tweet back in late July, which was more humorous than anything, honestly, even though it got Tucker's attention where he made entire piece against it. But from November until March, when Trump started pulling out the last stops for the Israeli elections, such as the Golan Heights, and declaring the IRGC a terrorist group, there hasn't been much chatter about Iran or anything the Iranians are doing. So it's definitely interesting to watch this pick up, and it almost reeks of desperation. It's showing, we've discussed Trump has pretty much, and I'll get into more of this later, dragged his heels enough to where he will not go to war. But the people around him can set the stage for either 2020 or 2024 when Trump is finally out.
Right. Even with this, I don't want to call it a fiasco, but this latest row with Iran, the EU made several statements today, including Macron while he was in Romania, basically asking Iran to stick to the deal that was forged in 2015, and that they would work and find a way to continue to trade legitimately. So that, in other words, to circumvent American sanctions. And also Trump, willing to negotiate. I think him saying that doesn't mean it's going to happen, but of course, it's also an acquiescence of some kind. Here's this carrier elite force that is supposed to come bearing down, and yet there's already new avenues and other avenues to circumvent that are in place, including countries that belong to NATO. And we've discussed this, the SWIFT alternative, the recent meeting with regards to that of China and Switzerland and so on. The world is changing. And I think Trump not wanting to get into a war is, ultimately, it's good. And ultimately, although this moronic media will probably end up ignoring it, I think it's going to be probably the best part of his legacy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, Trump dragging his heels, Trump's petulance will be his greatest legacy, as I said last night. And as you were talking about how Europe and, of course, Russia and China plan on circumventing U.S. sanctions, that's an interesting development. And this is a bit of a side, but I brought it up last night. I keep on going back to last night because I'm still a little bit frustrated, but that's aside the point. I'm almost glad that Brzezinski didn't live this long because his worst fears come true. A Russian-Chinese-Iranian alliance.
That's right. That's right. It's the thing that he feared the most. I also brought up this last night, and I think on a previous show as well. His in 2016, it was one of his last appearances on the Atlantic Council, and he was talking about now this is a very different Russia and China. These would have been a Russia and China that would have been on board, as it were. But he basically predicted that American presence and NATO presence in the Middle East will become more and more untenable, partly because of the multicultural mix within Europe. From North Africa and the Middle East, and generally, he put in terms of the kind of education that Arab countries are receiving with regards to the Crusades and so on and so on, and that being mirrored in Europe as well, and that a guarantor, for oil trade and propping up the keeping the American petrodollar going, would be Russia and China, but this isn't the kind of Russia and China he was envisioning, So I think he looks at this as a fiasco. He was like you. I kind of admire him because his perception of geopolitics was so strong that even when Maidan was occurring, and even after Crimea voted to join with Russia once again, when he was asked by a panel on Bloomberg News, what are we going to do? That Putin's a thug. He goes, I don't know. What are you going to do? So, in other words, he had plans. He had strategies that worked, say in Afghanistan. But the problem is a lot of his pupils applied the same strategy and thought they could apply it everywhere. So in Georgia, in Ukraine, that this was going to be the strategy, and the enemy was never going to learn this strategy.
Yeah, I mean, just to continue on Brzezinski, not to get off too much of a tangent, but I wanted to bring it up again, so we had a pretty good conversation about it last night. He, out of all the Cold Warriors, the ones who even kept it going after the fall of the Soviet Union, is the one I respected most, mainly because of his pragmatism, and also because of his perception of the world. A lot of these people, I look at them, and I see them as completely delusional. I look at these, Bill Kristols and these other types. I see them as like, what are you looking at? What world are you looking at? When I listen to Brzezinski, I feel like we're fundamentally looking at the same world. He just has different goals than me.
Yeah, very much, yeah.
But
he sees openings in places that we don't, or we'd rather not, because, we're sort of, ideologically we're not aligned. But yeah.
Yeah, again, we pretty much have the same. We accept all the same facts, which I can't say like we and someone like Max Boot accept all the same facts. But what we want to do with those facts are different.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it. That we accept the facts.
Now, getting back on topic, today, May 9th, Trump has said he's open to talks with Iran. Quote, "What I would like to see with Iran, I'd like to see them call me. We don't want them to have nuclear weapons. That's not too much to ask." He also took a jab at former Secretary of State John Kerry, saying, quote, "John Kerry, he speaks to them a lot. He tells them not to call. Frankly, he should be prosecuted on that." Now, I think his jabs at John Kerry are a bit odd, which I'll get into in a second, but I just want to finish reading this quote. He continued, "But they should call. If they do, we are open to talk to them. I want to see them be strong and have a great economy. We can make a fair deal." Now, as I was saying, his jabs at John Kerry were odd. Now, yes, Kerry has dubious ties to Iran. John Kerry's contacts with Iran are strange. A bit too much close. Bit too close for comfort is what I'm trying to get up before I had a stroke. But it seems odd that Trump is attacking him like he's running for president when John Kerry pretty much stepped out of politics the minute Obama left office, which I can give him credit on. Now, I don't believe Trump will get negotiations with Iran, but him at least saying that, showing he's open to it, shows that he wants to avoid a war at the very least, where he's less likely to listen to someone like John Bolton, who, as we'll get into when it comes to the Venezuela issue, he is allegedly very, very frustrated with currently.
Yeah, I read the situation in the same way. It's a kind of hesitancy. We've seen it before. Honestly, I think Trump has his head screwed on right when it comes to war. Because I think he was legitimate. I think in 2016, his ideas, however naive they were, however misunderstood he was in perceiving what it would take to, have an America that essentially is for America, that, as we've spoken up before, that in a multipolar world is working its way to become a nation again instead of an empire. As misplaced and misunderstood as that might have been, and of course he had really no experience in this, and of course he's been completely hampered by it, except for the pressure that he's able to exert on China. When it comes to wars, I think he's fully aware that would literally destroy any chance that America would have of any kind of realistic or positive transition.
Yeah, but I don't think that Trump was like trying to fool us or anything. Like, oh, he was out to get us. Oh, I'm going to trick the American people, say I'm not going to go to war, and then turn the neocon Don, like some people are convinced. Even though that's more of a like Bernie Sanders supporter type of position, I don't buy into that. But I will say this: Trump, it's strange because this all goes back. I go back to this all the time that he did not want to stand strong on the Mike Flynn issue, and Mike Pence ultimately took over his transition team and made all these appointments, and ultimately led to the people Trump is surrounded with today. Not only the high-ranking ones such as Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, but of course all the lower-level ones throughout the White House, throughout the other staff. But I do want to say that moving on into Zelensky because there's been some similarities. So if you have any final thoughts on Iran, I'll let you get those out.
No, that's it for now. Only that financially they are in big trouble. That inflation is skyrocketing there, and that you know we might see something, not in terms maybe of conflict, but of some deals being made, something extraordinarily developing because I think Russia and China don't want to see an Iran that goes through some kind of a regime change or some kind of economic collapse.
Oh no, that would be terrible for them. But that actually brings up a point I was going to make. In terms of war with Iran, number one, Iran is going to tread lightly because the arms embargo is going to be lifted next year, which will allow them to trade with Russia and China for arms. So they'll probably get the S-400s over the next year or so, either 2020 or 2021. Number two, engaging Iran would require us to go back into Iraq to fight the Shia-backed forces in Iraq. It would require us to go into Syria even further to fight the Shia forces in Syria, if not Assad's government itself. And it would require us to go into Lebanon to fight Hezbollah. So it would go from a war with Iran to a major regional war where the Gulf states wouldn't get involved. I mean, they're damn near worthless at fighting. Look at how their coalition has done in Yemen. Israel, they would, I mean, they'll probably at the very least do the Samson option if they felt threatened, so don't expect much help from them. And Turkey, at that point, it may just push them fully into siding with the Shia Muslims at that point because relations between the U.S. and Turkey have been so strained.
Right, and Iran and Turkey and a lot of issues are actually in agreement. Syria is more of an exception than a rule.
Yeah, the Sochi summits, it's Putin, Rouhani, and Erdogan, and those are always go over swimmingly. Sometimes Assad is there, but yeah, Syria is the one main stumbling block between them, and as the situation continues to sort itself out, Turkey will logically go with Russia, Iran, and China, which, again, that weird axis is formed mainly by U.S. power. Now, as the U.S. retracts over the next coming decades, we'll see how that goes, but as for now, they're as good as an axis.
Yeah.
So I do want to move on to Zelensky. So President-elect of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has proposed to Parliament that his inauguration date should take place on May 19th. Some have disputed this because it would fall on a national holiday. Now, in accordance to Ukraine's constitution, the president should take office within 30 days of the official publication of the election results. And the official publications of the results happened on May 3rd, so in that case, Zelensky would have to take the oath of office by June 2nd, my birthday, by the way, so you can PayPal me, but again, that's beside the point. Now, Southfront, which is a wonderful source for this program, I get many stories from them, especially on Syria, made a short video over the weekend dubbing Poroshenko, quote, the Obama of Ukraine, and dubbing Trump, quote, dubbing Zelensky, quote, the Trump of Ukraine, citing that he is an outsider with potential to overhaul the system, but will be burdened by an entrenched establishment and no hardened supporter base because he does not have a political career. Now, another point that they made is Zelensky's relationship with oligarchs may ease tensions with Russia, even if it's on behalf of financial reasons and big business. But I thought it was very interesting that they pointed out that Poroshenko came in like on the what was it, Revolution of Dignity? That was his campaign slogan, and pretty much oversaw
Right.
the damn near collapse of the country of Ukraine. Now you have Zelensky almost uh, doing aping that Trump bit where he's coming in, no real political experience, no real political, no strong political views except on a few issues. He's coming in and saying, "Well, look, I'll fix Ukraine." And again, I think the funniest part about Zelensky, aside from the fact that he's a literal comedian, is that he ran because people wanted him to, because he polled high, so he decided to form his own party and get in the race. It's not even like he announced and people got around him like Trump did. No, he was almost pushed into it by the people of Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, in a similar way, what in the way that Trump has been branded as the America's first postmodern president. I don't know. I would say that in some ways, maybe Bill Clinton and Reagan were close forerunners to that. Zelensky is very much to a T the postmodern president of Ukraine. Here's a guy with absolutely no experience. He played a guy who becomes president of Ukraine, and he becomes president of Ukraine. Now, at the start, we in other episodes we've talked about how Merkel kind of shunned him, like when he won the first round in the Ukrainian elections. So, congratulations to Poroshenko, but not to Zelensky. Well, things have changed now, and it's not just the acceptance of, I think, the victory, Zelensky's victory, but that Zelensky will probably be malleable in the sense that they see Zelensky probably as someone who is more malleable with regards to IMF loans, to integrating himself into the EU, and putting NATO secondarily in order. Whereas Poroshenko, his approach was to focus more on NATO than on the EU, and frankly, he had his approach was basically to please America more than Europe. Not that Europe and America are greatly at odds here; they're not. They're just two different approaches. Basically, ultimately, they want Ukraine in NATO and in the EU. But the only argument is about which one should come first. So, Ukraine right now is suffering at a trade loss with Russia by 13 times. They're buying gas from Europe because of these sanctions and counter sanctions between Ukraine and Russia. Second of all, it has a very high unemployment rate. While Russia's economy is started to stabilize, and they've been at just under 5% unemployment for several years now. So they're finding their footing, but Ukraine hasn't. And the best analysts at the moment are predicting that it will take Ukraine probably around 8 years. Some are saying it could even take 10 to return to the economic level that they were at in 2013.
Now, I think what a lot of those analysis might be ignoring is the massive demographic crisis, such as about 1 million people a year leaving since the revolution. But then you also have Russia, with their recent move we discussed last week, expediting the process for Ukrainian citizenship, for Ukrainians to become Russian citizens. So you have that, and then you're going to have the ones who refuse to go to Russia. They're going to head westward, whether that be Poland, Germany, the United States, Canada, wherever. But point being is, people are just going to flood out of
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine, and I do want to get into actually a bit into the EU as you were discussing. Zelensky has also taken moves to court the European Union. He sent a delegation to Brussels, which of course the Brussels elite were very happy about, and they described it as very positive. Now, the Brussels elite have also urged Zelensky to appoint establishment figures to military and diplomatic positions rather than his campaign loyalists, which the way it looks is he's been considering them. Now, We also have to consider that no matter who is president, Kiev is beholden to the West mainly due to, as you were saying, IMF loans.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take some time for Ukraine uh, to rebound. Also, the level of corruption that's often cited. Well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, Ukraine is going to be in a very difficult spot for several years. I don't think we're going to see Ukraine really in a better spot until 2025, 2026. But a lot of this is just posturing. Right now, Ukraine doesn't sound like a lot, but if you were Ukraine, $12 billion in debt and constantly needing to borrow more money in order to keep the country afloat, financially speaking, is not a long-term solution. That's still not turning around. But then again, I mean, in a sense, that's what the EU wants. So they want this country that's been depopulated, that its resources are up for grab and very cheap, and kind of reminds you of '90s Russia.
It's actually very interesting that the EU plans for Ukraine are almost identical for the German plans for Ukraine during both world wars. Not to go boomer tier and compare, say the EU are literally Nazis, but it's a bit interesting. They wanted to depopulate Ukraine that they use for its resources and farmlands, and yet again, the European Union, through neoliberalism, accomplishes what the greatest German leaders and most infamous German leaders could not. At least for now.
Right. It's this kind of resentment that some of these countries have towards one another. It really plays into the hands of the stronger powers. I mean, it's ages old. Historically you have various Celtic and Germanic tribes during Rome's height. Rome played them, and in the end, they were subjugated for centuries. So it's essentially the same pattern, the same playbook that's being played here.
It's interesting because it's almost like fourth generation warfare or something from the Roman era that we've just revived, and not anything too new or revolutionary. But that's a subject for a different day. Now, despite the situation in the Donbass and Crimea, the first challenges of the Zelensky administration will be solving both the gas dispute with Russia and Belarus and dealing with Russia's new measurement on Ukrainian citizenship. So we have a man coming into office not only faced with economic crisis, but also faced with an energy and population crisis.
That's right. So at the moment, since the outbreak of the war, it's been 5 years. 4.5 million Ukrainians have left. It's believed that 2.5 million have gone to Russia. 1.5 million, perhaps a little more, into Poland and other parts of Europe. And of course, with the fast track, which, if you read it, actually is not that much of a fast track passport to get into Russia from Ukraine, is now up, and this is going to see further depopulation, especially when you consider that the recent language laws that are going in effect, where government, media, including professionals, doctors, and so on, will only be allowed to use Ukrainian. You could be fined for using Russian if you if you state your opinion that you think Ukraine should use both languages. You could get prosecuted 10 years.
In a country where I believe, what is it, like 40% speak Russian as a first language, and how many of that 40% don't even know Ukrainian?
Even higher than that. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
over Poroshenko himself did not know Ukrainian.
I mean, over half of Kiev speaks Russian.
Yeah. Poroshenko himself did not know Ukrainian until he took power.
That's right. He literally had to have Ukrainian lessons.
But I do have to say in closing, absent a economic, cultural, and political miracle, not one of those three, but all of those three together, Ukraine is heading towards a massive crisis due to emigration and economic issues. And it, it may well, you would probably ask your average Ukrainian, barring the most nationalistic ones. I imagine 9 out of 10, probably more, would take Yanukovych governing the country as a Russian satellite state back any day.
Yeah, I don't know for sure if it would be 9 out of 10, but all of them have said, let's say it's implicit that it might be that. All of them have said that life was better before Maidan. Now, some things about Maidan are non-negotiable now for them, but including more independence and so on. But none of them will claim that life has been better since Maidan.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, quite a. I imagine the ones who were really big supporters of Yanukovych have probably followed him to Russia. But let's
Oh, for sure.
yeah, let's move on from that to Venezuela. Apparently, Trump has been having a bit of go ahead with his advisors, bit of clashing of heads behind closed doors. But I'll get into that. So Trump has actually been openly butting heads, to contradict my previous statement, with his advisors over specifically the Venezuela issue and to part in the Iranian issue, but mainly the Venezuelan one. Especially when it comes to the subject of Russian presence in the country. Trump said on Twitter on Saturday morning, quote, "Very good call yesterday with President Putin of Russia. Tremendous potential for a good/great relationship with Russia, despite what you read and see from the fake news media, all capitalized. Look how they've misled you on the, quote, Russian collusion. The world can be a safer and better place. Nice!" Exclamation point.
Right, and then the media said, "Why does Trump trust Putin more than our intelligence?" It's the same line that we've heard. I mean, he just can't catch a break. But that's another instance where I think, let's face it, there was another coup attempt. This coup should have happened 3 months ago, and I think what's dawning on people is that maybe there isn't the popular support that we thought there would be. So. Where do we go from here? The truth is that there's very little presence with regards to Venezuela of Russian forces there. Certainly nothing of the sort in comparison to Syria. The problem is there isn't popular support among Venezuelans. So it's the coup attempts are not succeeding.
Now, Trump also said he, in reference to Putin, is not looking to get involved in Venezuela, other than he'd like to see something positive happen for Venezuela. And he continued to say, and I feel the same way. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office during a meeting with the Slovak Prime Minister. Now, this contradicts statements by both Bolton and Pompeo, who have spent the past 3 months criticizing Russian involvement in Venezuela. So you had these. Again, we're almost back to 2018 Trump, where Trump says one thing, his underlings say another thing, and we don't know what's really going on.
Right. Yeah, I think you mentioned it before, that there's... Trump is contradicting them again. And this kind of mixed messaging, it no longer has like this ability to throw, say countries like Russia off its feet. It just means that the power structure in the U.S. right now is not coherent, and it's at odds with itself.
I mean, I'm almost comforted having the mixed messages back, because we didn't have them for so long after having them for 2 years, and it became normal in my mind, and it makes me feel good because it feels like just a little bit of old Trump is there, where he's just dragging his heels and pushing back just enough.
Right, and this also gives Russia an opportunity to, again, be a broker. They're acting as a broker in Venezuela, and I think they're going to go for something that benefits them. I don't think this isn't going. They're not going. America's not going to completely take Venezuela. And of course, Venezuela has lots of sanctions and. I'm sure the IMF would like to give it several loans and so on. But I'm very sure that Russia and probably China as well would probably counter offer. So it remains to be seen what will happen. Perhaps there'll be another attempt. I can't say with 100% certainty how that will go, but my guess is it won't be successful. Guaido's last attempt, claiming that they had taken over the airport to, bolster confidence that it was going to work this time, that proved to be fake news very quickly. Nobody believed it. And what are they going to pull out? What kind of rabbit are they going to pull out of the hat next time? I don't know, but he's not going to be believed.
Yeah, I mean, Guaido, even amongst the most ardent, even at this point in the West, even amongst the most ardent anti-Maduro people, looks like a joke. I mean, I called this guy out from the beginning. I've said, like, look, I don't care what the Venezuelans do with their own country. They can have Maduro. They could have, they could elect some comedian as president like the Ukrainians did. At the end of the day, I don't care what they do. But Guaido is a total joke, and he has ties to the West, and that's undeniable. But I do want to go on with this. It was reported by the Washington Post, so take it with a grain of salt, that Trump is frustrated with his administration's approach toward Venezuela, particularly with John Bolton. Now, Trump made an offhand comment about Bolton, quote, wants to get him into a war. So maybe it's like one of those where you're laughing but your eyes scream help me sort of moment. That's why I imagine it went down as.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Bolton and Pompeo, they're fossils, and Trump, all his best men were ousted very, very soon, and a lot of that had to deal with, of course, the whole so-called Russia collusion investigation. So he doesn't have much to work with, but in a way, him countering them only entrenches the idea that we're not going to see the kind of interventionism that America was doing in the 90s and in the 2000s. That era has probably passed.
And even the color revolutions, such as the Arab Spring in Ukraine that we had under Obama, have passed. You look at the total, again, as you're saying, failure in Venezuela, but this goes back to what I've been saying for a while. Trump is no hero, but he can delay it long enough in order to keep the U.S. out of it in the most part. Now, I said over this week, and I believe actually on Saturday on Twitter, that Trump's foreign policy can best be described as reluctant neoconservatism. That's what I'm calling it from now on.
Yeah. Yeah, he's maybe closer to even Buchanan in that regard. Minus the border and so on.
Oh boy, that's I'm not even going to get into that one now. But
yeah,
it's just depressing. But just a couple more topics. We have China. We're coming up on the hour 4-minute mark, so let's hope it doesn't crash now. I laugh nervously. But on Tuesday, the Chinese military was placed on high alert and warned the U.S. to leave the South China Sea. Chinese officials claimed that the U.S. excuse for freedom of navigation for operations in the South China Sea were invalid because U.S. ships entered into Chinese territorial waters. Now, this is even beyond the trade war, but of course it's just bluster between the two. Don't take it seriously. It's not like the Chinese are going to stage an operation to push us out of the South China Sea. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But as I've said before, I'm not too bothered by the U.S. maintaining a presence in East Asia, especially out of all its presences, and cooperating with the countries in the region. That being said, the U.S. is doing what it always does and is pushing it too far. Yes, China makes incursions in the waters of countries who are our allies, such as the Philippines, but that doesn't mean we need to conduct these constant drills and inflame the situation. The security guarantees we've given to our allies should suffice. The frequencies of these drills and exercises begin to make us honestly look desperate. Now, as countries in the region, especially Japan, begin to be remilitarized, we should be turning over our responsibilities over the past several decades to them.
This is the big issue. China is really the biggest issue with the U.S. right now. much more so than anything else. Um, but I think imposing tariffs, like, soy farmers in America are hurting right now. There's probably a few other industries, but overall, my impression is that the Chinese are suffering worse. There's like this time last year, in comparison to this time last year, electronic products, technology is down 40% of exports from China to the U.S. Textiles are down like 13%. So it's made a big impact.
Now, as you
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
as you just broached the subject, Trump has moved to break the trade war truce as it was made back at November's G20 summit. So Trump has said that China is not honoring agreements and that tariffs will be rising 25% by Friday on $200 billion worth of goods. Now, Trump tweeted on Sunday, quote, "For 10 months, China has been paying tariffs to the USA of 25% on $50 billion of high-tech and 10% on $2 billion of other goods. These payments are partially responsible for our great economic results. The 10% will go up to 25% on Friday. $325 billion of additional goods will be sent to China have been remained untaxed, but will shortly at a rate of 25%. The tariffs paid to the U.S. have little impact on the product cost, mostly borne by China. The trade deal with China continues, but too slowly as they attempt to renegotiate. No exclamation point." So that
Mm.
somewhat compounds on what you're saying. Now, I am a bit frustrated with this, but I don't have a problem most people have with it. You're seeing even a lot of Trump's own base rebel on it. Now, I've said from the beginning, I was not interested in striking a deal with China, rather divesting from them and ending our interdependence on them. Because at the end of the day, you can make the argument from both a pro-Chinese and pro-U.S. perspective that being so intertwined, it's like I used this term earlier, but it's almost an incestuous relationship how close it is, and I think we would be both better off if not immediately, slowly but surely, we put tariffs, we put trade barriers up, and ended this disgusting interdependence we had on each other.
Yeah. It it what to say? Although America's economy is so tied in with China at the moment,
Yeah,
and
like I said, it would be a long process. Wouldn't expect anything overnight, but somebody's got to take the first step. I mean, Trump, I've generally supported his Asia policies, trade policies, but for me, it's not enough.
yeah, yeah. Like I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is probably the most intertwined economy and the largest economy that the world's known. And there isn't going to be a quick solution, and
Yeah,
not
I
for a
mean,
while.
and if one of us goes into crisis, the other one goes into crisis. You have the two most powerful countries in the world. I would say China's probably overtaken Russia at this point. If they one of them goes in the chaos, the other one goes in the chaos, or if they're butting heads with each other diplomatically, militarily, like we are, it's going to be chaotic for the entire world. So, if we're going to have this kind of relationship, we need to start disinvesting with each other. And to China's credit, with the Silk Road and the Belt Road Initiative project, they have been working on that. But I'd like to see more of that on the U.S. side, where Trump says, "Look, we can trade in Asia, we can still talk to China, but we need to end this intertwined relationship." And that's what I'm really looking for. I don't expect that anytime soon. I don't expect that under the Trump presidency because, of course, Trump wants to play Mr. Art of the Deal, which, again, I'm not necessarily opposed to, but I would prefer um, stronger measures on that. But with that, I will move to the final subject of the show while we're pushing our luck with my recording software. The North Korean missile tests have picked back up. So on Saturday, North Korea conducted new missile tests, but no new nuclear tests, fortunately enough. Now, this is the first test since November 2017. If I had to guess, this is likely in response to Trump's recent rhetoric and moves regarding Iran and Venezuela. Now, this also follows the deadlock during the Hanoi meeting, which Trump said he would be open to a third meeting. And Trump, to my surprise, actually downplayed these North Korean missile tests and said, "I trust Kim. I don't think he's violating any of our deals, and I think he knows what he's doing." So that's it. It gives me a little bit more confidence that Trump isn't going to blow this, and he probably realizes that recent U.S. policy is playing into Kim's moves.
Yeah, I don't think, Kim is basically posturing that he's not afraid. That, that he still can. I mean, I know they're all show, and you could conversely say that uh, that it doesn't threaten America either. At this point, we all know it's just posturing, but it still contains a kind of significant symbolic language that indicates where the power struggle is. Um, Now, what's going to happen? I mean, notice that from the last show that we did that Kim is doing this after meeting with Putin, after going to Russia, right? So he's posturing, a kind of independence from the talks that he had with Trump, with the U.S.
Yes, I was actually just about to bring that up. So, um, also, more news out of North Korea is according to the Pyongyang official news agency, so this isn't any Western media, North Korea is preparing a long range missile launch drill. Kim said, quote, genuine peace and security of our country are guaranteed only by the strong physical force capable of defending our sovereignty. Now, while these recent moves are probably due to concerns about the U.S., it's possible that North Korea is using this to project against South Korea, considering the fact they've had ongoing negotiations that haven't ceased. And it could be just a personal impasse between Kim and Moon, where Kim is saying, "Look, I don't like the direction you're taking these negotiations, so I'm gonna pull out some of my big guns, show them off." So it could be an inter-Korean dispute.
Yeah, it could be. South Korea recently just okayed delivering grain to North Korea. Um, that just happened this week. So they are getting support. It, a lot of this is it's very old. I mean, it's been going on for decades. North Korea routinely can strong arm in a sense, or South Korea into providing aid by doing these missile launches.
Yes, they're able to pretty much exploit South Korea and the world at large into doing their bidding, whether that be more financial aid, more food aid, by doing some military drills, some nuclear tests, maybe more back in the earlier days. But yeah, you have a point, and I don't make too much of this at all. I think that relations between the two Koreas have continued to improve. We haven't really seen any major falling out between them, which every time I talk about the North Korea issue, I go back to the point: if the two Koreas are still cooperating with each other, we don't have much to worry about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't see a conflict happening there at all.
Now, I feel like I'm pushing my luck here after last night's incident, so with that, I will close out the show. I hope you all enjoyed our subject matters. Of course, we will try to be back next week, and the scheduling over the next couple weeks may be a bit odd. We both have some things going on, but we'll try to keep the show going, whether it's just me or whether it's both of us, or whether I find some new co-host to replace my resident boomer here. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.